was a chilly Thursday afternoon, just past 2 p.m., when Jackson Ward stepped through the revolving glass doors of Evermore Stays in downtown Chicago. To any onlooker, he was just another weary traveler. His old denim jacket frayed at the sleeves, jeans faded from time, and a baseball cap pulled down low to shade his face. A worn duffel bag hung off one shoulder, and his sneakers told stories of many miles walked. He looked unremarkable, even forgettable, and that was the point. No one would suspect that beneath that quiet exterior stood the very man who had founded and built the hotel empire from the ground up, the man whose name once symbolized hospitality reborn. The lobby greeted him with all the usual trappings of modern luxury. Marble floors that gleamed like water under light, the faint scent of lavender floating in the air, and the rhythmic chime of elevators arriving and departing like a silent orchestra. The illusion of care was perfect. Too perfect. But Jackson wasn't here for the marble or the music. His eyes locked on the front desk, where a small line of guests stood waiting, their bodies quietly resigned. There was a family juggling two restless children, a businessman distracted by his glowing phone, and an elderly woman in a dated green coat clutching a printed reservation as though it were her lifeline. Behind the desk stood a single employee, a young man named Derek, according to his crooked name tag. Derek's vest was crisp, but his demeanor sagged under the weight of something heavier than exhaustion. His fingers moved with painful reluctance over the keyboard. His eyes, dull and unkind, never met a single guest's gaze. He pointed, robotic and indifferent. "Next," he called out, without lifting his eyes. The elderly woman stepped forward. Her voice was soft, uncertain, but filled with the kind of grace that only age and patience can teach. "Hi, I made a reservation online for this weekend. I printed the confirmation. Here it is." She placed the paper on the counter like an offering. Derek glanced at it, barely giving it a second's thought. "If it's not in the system, it doesn't exist," he mumbled. "But this is from your website. I checked twice." Derek rolled his eyes, sighed louder this time, his voice cold and cutting. "If you can't check your email properly, maybe you shouldn't be traveling." The words dropped like a stone into a quiet pond, rippling through the line of guests. The woman froze. Her mouth opened slightly, perhaps to protest, but no words followed. Her shoulders sagged, her grip on the papers tightened. Not one person stepped forward. Not one voice rose in her defense. Derek tapped a few more keys, then slid a key card across the counter with all the care of tossing trash. The woman took her papers and key, blinking rapidly, and shuffled aside. Jackson felt a knot tighten in his chest. His pulse quickened. What he had witnessed wasn't just poor service. It was cruelty, plain and simple, and it was happening inside a place that bore his vision, his name, his legacy. Evermore was built on one unshakable belief that every person who walked through those doors deserved to be treated with dignity, whether they wore designer suits or old sneakers, whether they booked through apps or printed pages. He joined the line quietly, jaw clenched, waiting. When his turn came, Derek finally looked up. "Name," he said flatly. "Jack Morris," Jackson replied, using the alias prepared for this trip. "ID?" Derek asked, already typing with two sluggish fingers. Jackson handed him the card. Real ID, fake name. Derek didn't say another word. He pushed the room key across the counter with the same indifference. "Room 315, elevators on your left." "Thank you," Jackson said calmly. But Derek had already turned away. Jackson took the key card and walked away, every step echoing louder than the last. The woman's silent pain still clung to the air. But it wasn't just about her anymore. It was the stillness in the lobby, the way no one made eye contact, the hollow energy that filled the space like fog. This place wasn't Evermore. Not anymore. As the elevator doors closed around him, he looked at the lights marking each floor. This wasn't a visit. It was a mission. He was here to observe, to understand what had broken within the bones of the company he had once called his heart. And what he had seen downstairs was just the surface. Room 315 greeted him with sterile perfection. Everything in place, nothing personal. The lighting was soft but cold, the bed made perfectly but devoid of warmth. There was no welcome note, no gesture that said, "We're glad you're here." Just the silence of a room that didn't care. Jackson sat on the edge of the bed and opened his phone, launching the guest review dashboard, a tool he rarely looked at himself. It was typically filtered and summarized by the operations team, but now he read each line, raw and unfiltered. Staff acted like they hated being there. Felt like I was bothering them by asking for anything. Checked in and felt invisible. Won't come back. He closed the app slowly, letting the words burn into his thoughts. This wasn't Derek's failure alone. It was systemic, rooted deeper. Somewhere along the way, the culture he had planted with care had been choked by something colder. He stood and walked to the window. Chicago's skyline stretched before him, sharp and beautiful. But Jackson didn't see it. All he could see was the woman in the green coat, and the silence that followed her. Something had to change, and it would start tonight. Jackson pulled the curtain aside, letting in the soft glow of city lights. Below, the streets of Chicago pulsed with movement, cabs weaving through traffic, buses rumbling past, pedestrians pacing quickly, bundled against the wind. Everything down there had direction, purpose. But up here, high above the hum of the city, in one of the very buildings he had once helped raise from blueprints and bare walls, Jackson felt strangely unanchored, a visitor, a stranger in a place meant to feel like home. The weight of that realization pressed into his chest. He remembered the beginning, the first Evermore in a modest corner of St. Louis. He used to walk those hallways every night, asking guests how their stay was going, sharing quiet jokes with the cleaning staff, learning everyone's names. On rainy mornings, he'd personally hand out umbrellas. Back then, hospitality wasn't about metrics or margins. It was a human instinct, a matter of kindness. Something had shifted. Somewhere the soul of it all had been misplaced. He looked down at himself. Plain shirt, faded jeans, beat-up sneakers. No tie, no watch that screamed wealth. He didn't want to be seen as the boss. He wanted to see the truth, unfiltered. And what he'd seen so far hadn't just disappointed him. It had cut something open inside. The hotel, his hotel, had forgotten the people it claimed to serve. Sitting back on the stiff bed, Jackson flipped open the room service menu. It wasn't even a menu, just a QR code beneath the words, "For a seamless experience, scan to order." No phone to call the kitchen, no button for concierge. Just a soulless digital form buried behind 3 screens. Jackson set it down, more numb than annoyed now. He stood, slipped his keycard into his back pocket, and made his way back to the elevator. The lobby was as still and indifferent as before. No music, no smiles. Derek had gone, replaced by a younger employee who looked equally drained. No greeting, no spark. Jackson didn't stop at the desk. Instead, he walked to a quiet corner near a large decorative planter and sat down. From here, he had a full view of the check-in counter. He became a shadow, a quiet observer in his own story. He watched a family with toddlers wait almost 10 minutes without acknowledgement. A businessman approached the desk, stood awkwardly, and left after being ignored. An older woman struggled at the touchscreen kiosk, her eyes darting around for help that never came. No one stepped in. No one smiled. The staff moved slowly, mechanically, like people counting minutes, not making moments. Jackson rubbed his hands together, cold but not from the air, This wasn't stress, this wasn't fatigue, it was emotional detachment, a disconnect that had sunk its roots deep. This place had stopped caring, and the guests, they felt it. He leaned back, closed his eyes for a moment, and listened. The lobby had become a machine, polished and efficient, but hollow. No welcome, no warmth, just walls. By 8 p.m., Jackson was still there, a silent witness. The rhythm hadn't changed. He sat now behind a wide pillar, close enough to hear the front desk, but hidden from sight. The air smelled like lemon polish and lavender. Everything appeared pristine. Then, the front door opened. A man entered slowly, his coat far too thin for the Chicago chill. He clutched a worn suitcase and a folder held tightly to his chest. His walk was careful, fatigued. He looked like someone who'd been in transit far too long. Jackson leaned forward. The man approached the desk. Derek was back. "Good evening," the man said softly, offering a paper. "I made a reservation online. I have the confirmation here." Derek didn't even glance at the paper. He tapped on his keyboard. "I don't see anything here," he said. "But I printed the email, just in case," the man said, gently pushing the paper forward. Derek sighed, rolling his eyes. "If it's not in the system, it doesn't exist." "I came from Ohio," the man said, still calm but desperate. "My grandson just had brain surgery. This was the only place I could afford near the hospital." Derek leaned back and scoffed. "I don't have time for this," he said, louder now so the lobby could hear. "Call customer service. There's nothing I can do." The man stood motionless. He didn't protest. He just took the folder back, lowered his head, and slowly turned away. Jackson stood. He followed the man outside, catching him before the doors closed behind them. "Sir?" Jackson called gently. "Excuse me. Do you need help?" The man stopped, startled. He looked up with tired, kind eyes. "I'm all right," he said automatically. "You mentioned your grandson?" Jackson asked. "He's 12. The man nodded. "Surgery was 2 days ago. I'm just trying to stay nearby this weekend." "I saw what happened," Jackson said, softly. "You didn't do anything wrong." The man gave a small, sad laugh. "Maybe I should have booked one of those apps my son keeps telling me about." "You had a confirmation," Jackson replied. "That should have been enough." The man looked away, clearly embarrassed. "Name's Robert." "Robert Lane." "Nice to meet you, Mr. Lane. I'm Jack," Jackson said, still using the alias. "And you're not sleeping outside tonight. Come with me." "You don't have to do that," Robert said. "I want to," Jackson replied, holding the door open. Together, they returned to the lobby. Derek was gone again. The younger employee had returned. Jackson bypassed the desk and approached the concierge station. A young woman with tied-back hair stood there, poised and calm. Her name tag read, Caitlin. "Excuse me," Jackson said. "Could I speak to your manager?" "Of course, sir. One moment," Caitlin said, lifting the phone and speaking quietly. She turned to Robert with a gentle smile. "I'm so sorry for the trouble, sir. Someone will be right with you." Within minutes, a man in a navy mule suit emerged from the back. His steps were quick, alert. He extended a hand. "Jason Reed, general manager. How can I help?" Jackson didn't reveal who he was. Not yet. He explained what he'd seen. Jason listened, nodding solemnly. Then he turned to Robert. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Lane. That should never have happened. I'll take care of this personally." Robert's voice cracked. "Thank you. I didn't know what to do." "You don't have to worry anymore," Jason said. As Robert was led away, Jackson stood in silence. For the first time that day, something had gone right. But it wasn't enough. The damage had already been done. That moment, Robert's quiet helplessness was still echoing inside Jackson. This wasn't about hospitality anymore. It was about dignity. and someone had stripped it away from a good man. Jackson wasn't going to let that stand. The next morning, he sat in the hotel cafe with a plain black coffee. Sleep had eluded him. Robert's face lingered in his mind, the way he'd clutched those papers, fragile and folded. The kind of man who tried not to make trouble, even when trouble came looking. Guests slowly filled the cafe. Staff passed through the lobby with clipboards, coffee cups, stiff hellos. Everything was orderly, clean, but sterile, like a machine humming in neutral. Except for Caitlin. She moved differently, with intention. Her uniform was tidy, her expression serene. She greeted guests with nods, with warmth, and when she saw Jackson walk by, she didn't look through him like the others had. She smiled. "Good morning, sir. I hope you got some rest." "I did," Jackson replied softly, offering Caitlin a small nod of appreciation. He didn't need to say more. Her name, her kindness, had already etched itself into his memory. That mattered more than most things these days. Across the lobby, Jason Reed was deep in conversation with the housekeeping supervisor. He looked tired but alert, holding a notebook filled with scribbled notes. Jason approached him at a steady pace. "Morning," he said. Jason looked up and offered a tired smile. "Mr. Morris, right?" Jackson nodded, still holding on to the alias. "I wanted to thank you for the way you handled things with Mr. Lane last night." Jason's expression turned serious, almost pained. "I've been thinking about it all morning. That should never have happened. I checked the system. His reservation was in there. Derek just didn't check properly." Jackson let the silence hang for a moment. Then, gently, "How long has Derek worked here?" Jason hesitated. 8 months. Started strong, but recently, defensive, detached. There've been complaints, but nothing serious enough to escalate. "Until now," Jackson said, a quiet finality in his voice. Jason nodded. "Yeah, until now." Jackson's eyes drifted toward the front desk. Derek wasn't there. "He's off today," Jason added quickly. "But I'll be talking to him personally." Jackson studied him. Jason wasn't deflecting. He wasn't throwing anyone under the bus. He looked like a man trying to do the right thing in a system too big to hold together with tired hands. "Short-staffed?" Jackson asked. Jason sighed, lowering his voice. "Yeah, turnover's brutal. Everyone's stretched thin. I'm holding it together with duct tape and goodwill, but the culture is slipping," Jackson finished for him. Jason looked up, surprised, then slowly nodded. "Exactly." Another pause. "How long has Caitlin been here?" Jackson asked. Jason's entire demeanor changed. 6 weeks. First job out of college. Quiet, observant. Guests love her, and she sees things, small things most don't even notice. "She noticed Mr. Lane," Jackson said. "She did," Jason agreed. Jackson turned, watching Caitlin as she guided a confused couple toward the elevators, not just pointing, but walking with them halfway. "She's what this place used to be about," he said quietly. Jason didn't reply, but his eyes followed her for a long moment. "Would you mind if I stayed another night?" Jackson asked. "Of course not," Jason said, almost relieved. "Stay as long as you need." Jackson offered a quiet thank you. He didn't say what he was really thinking, that he wasn't just going to stay, he was going to uncover the whole truth. Because what happened to Robert Lane wasn't a fluke. It was a symptom. By midnight, the lobby had quieted. Guests were tucked into rooms, the glow from the chandeliers dimmed. Jackson sat in the same corner as the night before, hood pulled low, earbuds in. Silent. Listening. Derek was back. This time, another man stood beside him. Buzz cut, stocky frame, Name tag read Brent. At first, they worked in silence. Then the tone shifted. Sarcasm, mutters, laughter. "You see that guy in the cat sweatshirt?" Brent sneered, loud enough to carry. "Smelled like ramen." Derek laughed. "Told you, these budget types book cheap, then act like they own the place." Brent snorted. "Ask for late checkout like it's a basic human right." They both laughed. Cruel. Dismissive. Jackson leaned forward, slipping his phone onto the nearby table to capture the audio. The voices rolled on. Derek mocked a guest's accent. Brent joined in. Laughter spilled out, crueler each time. "Packed her whole kitchen," Derek smirked. "She looked homeless," Brent added. "Thought he'd ask for soup, not a sweet." Jackson closed his eyes. Not from exhaustion, but grief. This wasn't about burnout. This was venom. Casual contempt wrapped in inside jokes. They were punching down, and they thought no one would ever hear. But someone was. Jackson stood, unnoticed, and took the elevator back to room 315. There, he sat at the small desk and replayed the recording. Once, then again. Each time, it felt heavier. He pulled out a small black folder, the Evermore Employee Handbook. Page 3 stared back at him. "Our guests are not distractions. They are the reason we exist." He closed the book. Outside, Chicago glowed in neon and steel, but inside something had fractured. And he knew tomorrow would be different. The morning arrived gray, cold, indifferent. Jackson stood by the window, cradling a paper cup of coffee that had long gone cold. He hadn't slept. The recording haunted him. But he didn't need more evidence. He needed resolve. This wasn't a blip, it was rot, and it ended today. At exactly 9 a.m., Jackson walked into the lobby. Jason was there, speaking with a front desk associate. Caitlin stood nearby, calmly organizing guest forms. The world still turned. No one knew what was coming. Jackson approached. "Mr. Morris," Jason greeted him. "Is everything all right? Can we speak in private?" Jason paused, sensing the shift. "Of course. This way." They walked through a side hallway into a glass-walled office near the administrative wing. Jason closed the door. Jackson didn't sit. He placed his phone on the table between them. He pressed play. Jackson placed the phone on the desk, pressed play, and stepped back. The room filled with the crackling voices of Derek and Brent, their laughter laced with cruelty. They mocked accents. They ridiculed clothing. They joked about skin color, poverty, vulnerability. It was unfiltered, raw, and undeniable. Jason didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on the phone, unmoving. Only when the recording stopped did he let out a slow breath, as if it had been held in for hours. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to," Jackson replied, calm but unyielding. He reached into his bag, pulled out his wallet, and removed an ID card. Without a word, he placed it flat on the desk. Jason leaned forward. "Jackson Ward, founder and CEO, Evermore Stays." Jason blinked, stared, then looked up, color draining from his face. "You?" Jackson nodded. "I built this company 15 years ago, brick by brick, one guest at a time." "I didn't know," Jason whispered. "Mr. Ward, if I had known—" "That's the point," Jackson said gently, raising a hand to stop him. "You weren't supposed to. I didn't come here for a tour. I came because people stopped writing about clean sheets and started writing about how invisible they felt." Jason sank into his chair, eyes lowered. "This place wasn't always like this," he said. "I tried. We've been short-staffed, turnover's high, and I've been patching holes where I can." Jackson's tone was steady, not accusatory. "You can't fix what you refuse to see." Jason looked down, ashamed. I didn't know it had gotten this bad. Jackson stepped forward. Mr. Lane, the elderly man turned away by your team. He had a reservation. He came here to see his grandson, who just had brain surgery, and the only reason he wasn't left outside that night is because I stepped in. Jason swallowed hard. You're right. Jackson turned toward the window. Out in the lobby, Caitlin was helping a young guest with a tray. A bellman held the door with a cheerful nod. There was goodness here. Still, I'm not here to shut you down, Jackson said. I'm here to fix what we lost, but that starts with you. Jason stood. I want to lead that change. Then it starts now, Jackson said. Emergency staff meeting, 1 hour. Jason nodded, already moving. Exactly 1 hour later, the hotel's staff filled the conference room. Some stood with arms crossed. Others leaned against walls or clutched their phones. Derek was there. Brent, too. Caitlin stood quietly in the back. Jason entered first. Then Jackson followed. No suit, no name tag, just a quiet man with tired eyes. My name, he began, is Jackson Ward. Silence. A few jaws dropped. A few whispers flitted around the room. I founded Evermore 15 years ago. Jackson continued. We built this company on 3 values: dignity, warmth, and presence. He took a slow step forward. But last night I sat in the lobby and watched those values. His voice didn't rise, but the weight of each word was palpable. This isn't about one night, or one bad guest. This is what happens when a job stops being a purpose and becomes a routine. He looked directly at Derek. Mr. Lane had a valid reservation. He was here to visit a loved one in the hospital. He was turned away, laughed at behind his back, humiliated. Derek didn't lift his eyes. Jackson turned to Brent. And the things I heard about our guests, their voices, their cultures, their appearance, weren't just unprofessional, they were cruel. A shift passed through the room, a silence thick with reflection. But I'm not here to fire half this room. They caught them off guard. I'm here to rebuild what matters. Jackson walked slowly across the front. Effective immediately. Derek, you're placed on probation. Brent, you'll be reassigned to non-guest-facing roles. Brent clenched his jaw, but said nothing. Everyone else will undergo a 2-week retraining focused on empathy, crisis handling, and communication. He turned to Jason. You'll lead it. Jason nodded firmly. We're installing a live guest feedback system. Anonymous, real-time, not to catch failure, but to reward compassion. Jackson's eyes shifted to Caitlin. Like Caitlin, who helped someone who didn't even ask. She saw pain no one else noticed. That's what this place was built on. Caitlin looked stunned. Her co-workers looked at her differently now, with admiration. Evermore isn't just clean sheets and lavender-scented halls. It's supposed to be where people feel human again, safe, seen. Jackson let the silence return. I didn't come here to lecture you. I came because I still believe you're worth fighting for. He looked around the room. I still do. No one clapped, no one cheered, but something shifted. The weight began to lift. 3 months later, Evermore Stays in downtown Chicago was different. Not because of renovations or marketing campaigns, but because of something quieter. Something earned. The work was still hard, guests still got upset, but now the warmth had returned. Caitlin wore a navy blazer and a silver pin, guest experience lead. She hadn't changed much, still soft-spoken, still observant, but now others followed her lead. Jason kept his promise. He walked the floor daily, greeted staff by name, checked in with housekeepers, baristas, maintenance. He remembered birthdays, first days, small things. The live feedback system launched 2 weeks after Jackson's visit. The first review pinned to the break room read, "I came in tired and sick. A young woman at the desk offered me tea and asked if I needed help to my room. I cried when the door closed. I hadn't been treated like a person in days." That one stayed up for months. Derek completed his retraining. He grumbled at first, but a few weeks later, an elderly guest thanked him for holding the door and calling him by name. Derek didn't say much after that, but he showed up early the next morning, and again, and again. Brent left the front desk. He worked quietly behind the scenes now, managing supply rooms. Jackson had offered him a choice. "You're still part of this team," he said, "but we all have to grow." Brent did. And Robert Lane came back, not as a guest, as a visitor. Jackson had sent him a handwritten letter, inviting him for a weekend, free of charge. This time, when Robert walked in, Caitlin greeted him by name, helped with his bag, offered him tea, checked if he was warm enough. Jason walked him to his room personally. Jackson didn't return that weekend. He didn't have to. His part was done. But back in his office, hundreds of miles away, he smiled at a photo. Robert, Caitlin, Jason, all smiling. Something had been restored. Not everything was perfect, it never would be, but the tone was different. The spirit was back. Evermore felt like Evermore again. And Jackson? He continued visiting branches, quietly, without warning, not to punish, but to listen. Because he'd learned something in Chicago. The greatest threat to any company isn't a PR crisis or a bad review. It's forgetting who you are when no one's watching. Is losing the soul behind the slogan. And sometimes it takes a man in worn sneakers and a fake name to remind everyone why they started. Final reflection. Kindness doesn't need a title. Respect doesn't need a rule book. And dignity, once given, never goes unnoticed. The lavender fades, the reviews change, the uniforms evolve. But the feeling someone leaves with? That stays forever.